Welcome to Assembly Calendar. I'm Mike Friesen. With us for our program today, Assemblyman Will Barclay. Will Barclay represents the 120th Assembly District. That includes Oswego, Jefferson, and Onondaga counties. We want to thank you folks all throughout the region for joining us. And Will Barclay, nice to see you.
Mike, nice to be here.
This is our first chance to get together since the conclusion of the 2016 legislative session. A little bit of time for us to look back on some of the big issues, some of the successes, some of the not so successful things that happened during that session, and I think there were a few of those we can look back on.
Yeah.
I want to start off though with what I think was kind of a special day for you. There was an introduction made in the Assembly chamber, and I guess this is somebody you know pretty well.
I think I recognize him.
You
yes.
recognize it. If we're ready, if we can go right to the videotape, we'd like to roll that in, and probably most of you folks watching know this fella too.
Our colleague, Will Barclay, has a very, very special guest here in the chamber. The very distinguished Ambassador Doug Barclay is here with us today. Ambassador Barclay was the ambassador to El Salvador under President George W. Bush, but he was also a state senator from 1964 to 1984. He also happens to be Will Barclay's father. He's also accompanied here today with Garrett Bracey, who I am told is the river master for the Douglaston Salmon Run. And I am told it is where the best fishing in the United States is. So if you could please extend the cordialities of the House to Ambassador and his good friend, Garrett Bracey.
Certainly, on behalf of Ms. Corwin, the Speaker, and all the members, we welcome these distinguished guests here to the New York State Assembly. Ambassador and Mr. Barclay and son, we certainly are pleased to have you here. You are always welcome here. You are family. Please return as often as you can. And I'd love to take up fishing, too. But please come on and join us. Thank you so very much.
One of the affable characters that traveled around the Capitol hallways there a couple of decades ago.
Yeah.
And still well known. And
it was great to have him down. He hadn't been.
Yeah.
He was in the Senate from '64 to '84, and I don't know if he's been back sporadically, but very rarely. So it was great to have him down. I don't know if he'd been in Albany since my swearing in, which was some time ago. So it was great to have him down. Great to have him introduced, and he's doing well.
Good luck charm, maybe. Was it a precursor to getting some important things done
Absolutely.
in this legislative session?
Very good luck charm going in. And it was nice to have him, and then Garrett Bracey, who is the manager for the Douglaston Salmon Run, who's a great guy too. That was down there with my father.
Yeah,
so.
and he's the guy who knows where all the fish are.
That's right.
If
He's
you need
an expert fisherman. If everybody needs a fish, call Garrett.
So let's review now the 2016 session. I mean, it was a session that started off with a big cloud hanging over this legislature's head. Early on in the session, we saw the sentencing of two former legislative leaders who were convicted of corruption charges, Assembly Speaker Sheldon Silver, Senate Majority Leader Dean Skelos. And I think there was a lot of attention paid throughout the session. What is this legislature going to do to try to right itself, to save some face, to make some reforms, to change the way things got done around here? And for the longest time, we didn't see anything.
Right. So people, I mean, ethics is obviously one of the biggest issues down here in Albany, and for good reasons. You mentioned both the Speaker and of the Assembly, Sheldon Silver, has been convicted of a felony of abusing the public trust, and so did the Majority Leader in the Senate. So I think people have really lost any little trust they had probably beforehand, but have lost much of their trust and confidence in state government. So for a number of good government groups and constituents are calling for reform down here. Unfortunately, we did pass some reform, or fortunately we passed some reform, but nowhere near as much as we probably needed to do. The good news, and probably the easiest reform that I think if you polled New Yorkers, there was something like 80 or 90% of people supported this. This was a pension forfeiture. If you're convicted of betraying the public trust or taking a bribe, it seems to me pretty reasonable that you shouldn't be able to continue to collect your state pension after you're convicted. So we were able at last, this should have been done a long time ago, but it should have been done in the budget for a variety of reasons, political reasons. It didn't get done in the budget. But by the end of the session, we were able to pass a resolution that would take away any public officials, public officers' pension if they get convicted of a felony for bribery or essentially betraying the public trust directly related to their job duties. So this is something that has to be changed in the state constitution. So we passed a resolution this year. It takes one more legislative session. So next year we'll have to pass the same resolution, and then it will go to a referendum, which I have all confidence that will pass. A referendum, statewide referendum.
It could be one of the most overwhelming margins of victory of anything ever. I think there were so many people that were ticked off when they saw that Speaker Silver and Senate Majority Leader Skelos, as soon as the jury foreman announced the guilty verdict, one of the first things they did was apply for their pensions.
Right. And it's in the Constitution, so that's got to be amended appropriately, but it does seem outrageous. In particular, these aren't for if, not that this is a good thing, but if a public official goes out and, say, gets a DWI or does something that's not related. These are for corruption related directly to their
misusing
jobs.
Their authority, their power for their own benefit.
Right. And they shouldn't be rewarded for that through getting their state pension. So although this isn't a huge reform, I don't think it's necessarily going to change the way we do business down here. It certainly seems like a step in the right direction. And I don't know anyone that was for that, that they should be able to collect their pension for doing this. So
and frankly, aren't there some people that think that this really will have an impact, that this is one of those game-changing type things?
I think it certainly can't hurt. Whether they'll have a big impact or not, I think really we have to continue to have more transparency in Albany. One of the things I have pushed and our conference has pushed is term limits for some of the leadership in Albany for their actual positions, like the Speaker or Minority Leader for that matter. I think term limits go a long ways. As we saw in the Assembly, the Speaker, Sheldon Silver, was in for 20 years, and over that time he was able to amass a lot of power, so no one wanted to question him, even if they had some inklings that there were some, wrongdoings going on. So I think if we put term limits, it would allow new energy to come in, obviously, but also not allow someone to amass so much power.
So, setting aside what's going on in the national debate right now regarding one of the presidential candidates and her activities, we again have the Assembly Speaker, the former Senate Majority Leader. There's investigations right now into the New York City Mayor, the Governor's office of the state of New York, how monies are being spent on particular projects, and if there's influence being peddled in those situations. It's really putting a spotlight not only on some of the corruption issues that we just talked about, but how monies are spent at the state capitol. And there's, it seems like a very bright spotlight right now on a program called Startup New York. Again, I'm sure the folks watching have seen the ads on television over the past couple of years where the state is giving tax credits to businesses, and there's going to be all kinds of jobs created. Report came out just before the holiday weekend that said not the case.
Yeah, they released it the day before the 4th of July weekend at 4:30 in the afternoon. You wonder why they released something when it's going to be a slow news cycle, obviously, through the weekend. Well, they did it then because it's bad news. I think out of the millions and millions that we've spent on the startup program, it hasn't returned any jobs. Initially, they were supposed to bring 4,000 jobs in New York. I think we're looking at 400 jobs maybe were created through this program, and we've spent millions. I think $50 million alone just on advertising the program, so not to say all the tax breaks that come with the program. But I think, Mike, this leads to the larger issue that we have in New York State. And we've seen these economic development programs pop up from time to time. Remember, a number of years ago, we had the Empire Zone program, and that got knocked around a lot because it seemed like a lot of people were getting benefits through the Empire Zone program that maybe didn't deserve them or wasn't really designed. The program wasn't designed to help. And we've seen other, Buffalo Billion is a program which may have some positives to it, but boy, it seems like the idea of the government getting in and picking winners and losers in business is not really the greatest economic development policy. I've said all along that I think we need just to lower the cost of business across the board of doing business in New York, and then let businesses compete on an equal footing. I mean, why should someone, you've been in business, particularly some of these businesses in New York, been here for generations. They've been paying the high taxes. They've been enduring the high regulation. And then all of a sudden, we open it up. If you put it near a SUNY campus, you can get all these benefits tax-free. You don't have to go through all the hoops and thing. Why? And that doesn't seem quite fair to me, that your business has been here forever versus someone else that comes in and gets all the benefits. So really, we can't have government getting into this whole business of picking winners and losers. I think we should probably get rid of a lot of these economic development programs and just lower the cost of doing business generally for New York so people can compete and make, without us getting involved in deciding who to subsidize and who not to subsidize.
There are some people who think government should just get out of the way.
Right.
You know,
I happen
lower
to be one of 'em.
taxes,
Right.
lower taxes, cut the regulations, and just let the free market do what the free market will do.
Right.
And New York might be a much better place for
Right.
it.
Right. So, anyways, the Startup New York, I mean, the report came out, it just goes to show. And why are we spending $50 million to advertise a program in New York, too? That was the other thing I thought was interesting. So, we're spending this money to run ads in New York about Startup New York. We're already in New York. We already know what the circumstances is and the challenges. So,
And it was supposed to be for new companies,
right.
hopefully
Coming
from
in,
outside
I
the
guess.
state, right?
Right. So if they're got to come from outside the state, why are we doing it in New York State? So a lot of questions about that. But I think if nothing else, it illustrates that we have to have more transparency in these economic development programs.
In our remaining few minutes, I want to ask you about one last topic that we talked about quite a bit during this session, and that's the heroin crisis that's facing the state right now. There was a task force that traveled all around the state listening to people who are involved, families that have been wrecked by heroin use. And there's now been a series of proposals put forth by different legislators. It seems like the situation right now is it's hard to find agreement among legislators as to what the right way is to proceed.
Well, the good news is we did pass legislation to help combat the epidemic of the heroin issue that we have in New York State at the end of session. Some might say it didn't go far enough, but at least it's a first step. It's better than doing nothing. It did stuff like limit the amount of opioids that doctors can prescribe, the amount of time they can prescribe them from. I think it was 30 days. This might take it down to 10 days. I don't know if those numbers are exact, but it limited the amount of time you could give an opioid prescription for, which I think is a good thing. Also, it mandated different insurance coverage for heroin treatment. One of the problems we have in New York, these poor people can't get in to get treatment, and if even they can get in, they often can't afford the treatment once they get in because insurance very often denies coverage for that. So I think those were two very positive steps, but certainly we can do a lot more going forward. It's going to take a big investment from the state. We definitely need to put more treatment centers around the state. I know even in my area, they're struggling to find where to send people to get treatment, and then afterwards we have to make sure there's post-treatment to keep people off the heroin. But I think finally there seems to be a recognition by most people down here in Albany that this really is an epidemic that really has to be addressed, and it's a real crisis in New York State.
And it's one of those things that's, the horrible part is the way it's impacting individuals and families, but it's also a huge drain on state resources. Just ask your local police departments, sheriff's departments, they'll tell you a story upon story about how it's hurting them. And I think that's one of the positives I've seen in the way legislators are starting to come together on this,
right,
is knowing that the money's got to be spent on the individuals, the users, not trying to combat the people that are selling it,
right,
not trying to institute all these programs that maybe aren't going to do anything,
right,
but going right to those who need the help the most.
Absolutely. We got to do it all, frankly, and it is going to be expensive, but as I said, as you said, it's a crisis that needs to be addressed. So we'll keep working on that, and we can't forget synthetic drugs. That sometimes they get pushed aside. I think the problems we're having with synthetic drugs in our neighborhoods, because heroin seems to get the headlines, and rightfully so, but we also have to pass legislation to help combat synthetic drugs, because those who got involved in those obviously have ruined their lives, and it's hurt their loved ones and families, and it also has a real cost to the community too.
I think one of the things that surprises a lot of people who aren't familiar with the issue is that heroin, I thought that was a drug from the 1970s,
right,
but it has made a huge, it's gotten very cheap, I guess.
Yeah, it's cheap, something like $9 or something for a bag of heroin, which, it's very tough to combat because it's so cheap. And obviously because we had so much pain management in the healthcare world that people, once they stop being able to get the prescriptions, they want to get that same type of opioid somewhere else, and that's why they turn to heroin.
All right, so lots going on here. We will be meeting more during this off-session time to talk about what happened during this session and maybe what's ahead for this New York State Legislature at the state capitol. In the meantime, if you want to reach out to your representative, easy thing for you to do. You can get a hold of Will Barclay at his office in Fulton, dial 598-5185, or send an email. The address you see right there on the bottom of the screen, barclayw@assembly.state.ny.us. And as we thank Will Barclay for joining us once again, we thank you folks too. We appreciate you stopping by, and we are looking forward to seeing you again soon for our next edition of Assembly Calendar.